Hello and welcome developers. My name is Shay and this is another episode of Shay Develops. In this episode, we're going to continue our series on building a website from scratch. That means learning the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript in order to, like I said, take going from nothing and building an entire site, like I said, from scratch. Now, this won't have any kind of access like a database or anything, but we will have a form. We will do validation whenever we get to that JavaScript section, I will go in as much detail as I feel like you really need to understand working with the language. Now, this won't make you an expert by any means. You're definitely going to have to get in and get your feet wet and your hands dirty writing this code to understand it. But what this video series is really meant to teach is the overall arcing experience, or the overall arcing understanding that's needed to be able to solve the problems that these languages fix. So for instance, like we just had a quick video on HTML. Hopefully you're coming from that, where we just talked about HTML is structure. And that's really the most important thing about HTML, is how it structures the page. How to use it and all that stuff can be Googled. But to know that, okay, I want to structure my content and I have these tools available that helps me structure my content, that's what you really need to learn. And then where to go to find that structure. You don't need to know that I don't know. You just don't need to know every little bit about HTML. You really just need to understand where to go to find it, and then over time, your baked in knowledge of these languages is going to increase as you use them, and then decrease as you don't use them, and you'll find yourself re-googling this stuff over and over again. So don't worry about it if that's where you are. It's okay. And so it's just the more you work with it, the more you'll start to really understand it all. But like I said, most of us out here, we're all Googling the information that we're getting and using that information. But we're able to use that information because we know how it works and we know what we're looking for. So let's understand that about CSS. So CSS is cascading style sheets, and it allows us to pick out tags like this body tag or div tag or nav tag or this other div tag or this anchor tag or whatever. It allows us to pick out these tags, and we can specify which tags by like using like a class or an ID attribute within our text, or within our structure of our page, to pinpoint, I want to talk about this div or this anchor tag or this paragraph or whatever. So if we go back to, after we save this, let's actually give this class a nav container class, and that doesn't need an ID. Let's go. So if we come back to our styles.css and we go, let's actually get rid of this body background too. I don't like that. I just made it blue for the time being. But we create now a style that will attach to that HTML div tag with the class nav container. We want to attach something to this, right? So in order to attach that CSS to this div class, we're going to come in here and we're going to create a class. I believe these are called just a class selector that will select this div within our class. So it's called nav container, and then we're going to just get rid of that for right now. Nav container, and then within the nav container we could say I want the width to be 100% of the view space, and I want there to be a background color of blue-violet. Sorry if that was a loud thud. My microphone moved on me. All right, locking that back down in place. Okay. So I want to have a background color of blue-violet. Whenever I save this, these styling changes that I made through CSS are going to go over and be replicated over here through the browser. See, I removed the aqua background, so that's gone. And then now I have this nav container with a width of 100% with a background color of blue-violet. Now, something you might notice though is I've got this little bit of white space right here on the tops and bottoms. And you can try and like figure out like, hey, where's this extra white space and where I'm coming from by right-clicking on a page and hitting inspect. Now, inspect is going to bring up this panel over here on your right that allows us to see what's going on with the code that's being imported, or with the code that's being fed to the user. So if we were running something with some JavaScript and we're getting some JavaScript errors, we could come to this console and read out this console. Here's just some of the files. Like I said, if this is above your league, don't worry about this right now. Just glancing over at the moment. If we Control R, we can see the network of everything that's going on, and the waterfall of how long. The waterfall is just basically how long did it take for this resource to load, this resource to load, this resource to load. So you can kind of see if maybe you've got a bottleneck somewhere in your system. Performance. I said again, you don't really need to be messing around with all this stuff. So if we go back to our elements, though, that's really the more important part right here. We can see that within our body tag, it comes in with like this built-in margin of 8 pixels, and that's pushing our content out. So a lot of people will do is called they'll zero out their CSS page by coming into the body tag, and they'll do padding, margin. I don't even know if this works. No, this doesn't work. Okay, so do padding 0 and margin 0, and that basically zeroes out. And you notice as soon as I did that, now our content is right up against the side of the page. So now if I want my nav container to have some padding of say 10 pixels all the way around, top, bottom, left, and right, I can now specify that and start to make my navigation look more and more like a navigation, and then come in and say, well, I would like all the color of the text to also be white. Oh, well, that didn't work. And here's why, and this is a very important lesson here. That's why I definitely like live coding more than trying to come up with content on the fly, or trying to come up with content earlier, because you don't always like see these issues. You're like, I don't understand. So CSS works in a way where the CSS that is closest to the tag itself, there's a hierarchy as far as how this works, and we'll get into this way more detail here in just a minute, because it's pretty important. It's going to take the CSS properties of the properties that are closest to the actual tag or whatever's being manipulated itself. And you probably don't understand that quite off or right away. So how that works is we've created this CSS style sheet, right? And we've linked it to our index page, and some of the stuff is working, but then all of a sudden I can't change the color of this text to white. However, if I was to just, this is some text, that text is white. So why does that happen? Well, this happens because this anchor tag right here is getting some CSS properties that are already preset into it, and this happens with a lot of other property or a lot of other tags too, like the div tag, nav tag, basically everything. They've all got this set of properties that are assigned to it before the pages are even loaded. So what's happening is those CSS properties are taking effect where yours are not. So in order to fix this, you just need to be more specific in how you define your CSS selector right here. This is your CSS selector, that .nav container. So if I want to now specify that I want my anchor tags to have the color white, I'm going to pull this out of here, and then within my nav container, all of my anchor tags, I want them to be white. So what this is saying here with our selector is we're saying, hey, nav container, if you have an anchors tag inside of your tag, can you please specify the color of the text within the anchor tag to be white? And that didn't work. Interesting. So, okay, I want to figure out why. So I'm going to right click over here. I want to inspect. I want to add this nav container. Oh, well, that definitely makes more sense now. I went way too Oh, because it worked whenever I pulled it out of here. Yeah, so it's definitely not that way. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Why not? Maybe if I did this? No? Alright. Well, I definitely know how to make this white, but I kind of expected this to work, but it's a little confusing that it's not. One way I could do this is I could give these anchor tags each a class of their own, but I don't feel like that's that's best. I could instead have this div and give it a class of anchor container and go back to our styles.css and specify this as anchor container, and now my anchor text is white. But you'll notice that this is some text is no longer white because we're not telling that text to be white, we're only telling the anchor text to be white. If I wanted that text to be white, I would just create a CSS class or a CSS selector and just say color white. And then now it's all white. And then I'll specify this, and then now that's no longer white again. specify it to be white, and now it's white. So hopefully you're starting to grasp it, just a little bit, that we have these selectors right here that select stuff on our HTML page that we've specified already. So, our div with the class of nav container. So I use a dot to specify that this is talking about a class. If I wanted to talk about an ID, since earlier we were talking about ID, if I wanted to specify something with an ID, I could use the, I guess it's the hashtag sign now, and this specifies an ID. You don't have to use the ID, you just specify the name of the ID. That would be here. So if I had this nav, I could do ID equals main nav, and then within the style sheet.css, I'll call it main nav, and then now I can start manipulating the main nav ID just like I did the nav container class. It's all the same. Like I said, CSS is just project beautification, readability, like I said, or unreadability if you do it poorly, and where HTML structures it, this CSS, like I said, structures it in a visually appealing way. Like I said, hopefully, and puts things where we want it. So whenever somebody comes to us, like, oh, this looks like a professional site, versus, oh, this guy has no idea what he's doing, and the contrast is all off, and that's me, by the way. I have no idea what I'm doing as far as comes to making something attractive. But so the takeaway, as far as what you need to know for CSS, is that we can specify it in many different ways. We can link to it through our styles.css. We can actually then come in here and add a style attribute and say, I want you to have a background color of blue. And then once I save that, this paragraph now has a background color of blue. Even if I come in here and specify that I want all paragraph tags to have a background color of red. Why is that? It's because this style attribute is closer to the paragraph tag than this paragraph selector in the CSS page is to the paragraph itself. So because this one's closer, it takes precedence over any ones that were before it in the hierarchical lane of the CSS selectors. So that's the gist of, like I said, a CSS and understanding. So what you now need to start learning and developing that knowledge on is using these CSS selectors, what values that these properties that you're defining, like color, padding, background color, that kind of stuff, what values that these properties want. And that's all very easy to look up within, say, Google. You just need to, get a grasp of it and say, okay, what can I look up? But the part of the most important, we're getting ready to go over this because I feel like it's pretty important for CSS. We've just been so far been doing kind of superficial things. We can also, like I said, like lay out the content in a way that makes more sense as well. So if I wanted to like line up my line up my sections of content all across like one row or something, I could do that by changing the widths and flexing the divs and justifying the content and seeing that stuff starts to there's a lot to learn, and that stuff starts to get a bit overwhelming. But really, it's start slow, take it with the margin, the padding, the width, figuring out how these attributes work with the classes that you're given. And then sometimes you're going to find out, and I can't think of a way to make this happen right off the bat, but sometimes you're going to find out you're going to give something an attribute and it's not going to work, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to give it directly to, like, hey, I'm going to make sure you work by putting it within this style right here, like right on the element, and then it's still not working. And you're like, okay, well, why isn't this working? This should be working. Because every HTML tag comes with a preset bit of CSS with it. And you can actually take a look at the CSS right here. You see within this div block that we've got selected, this gray bit right here, hopefully it's gray, you can see it, where it says display block. That is stuff that's already inherently ingrained within the div element to show that it's a display block. So sometimes whenever you're using these CSS attributes that you're trying to mess around with this HTML with, it's not working. It's because it's kind of incompatible with the overlying CSS that's being added on top of it. So in order to get that to change, say this display block wasn't working out for me and it was causing something to mess up with me, I can come in here and just do display flex, and now I can use flex, and I no longer am using display block. So keep that in mind if you're having some issues, something's not working out for you. Other potential pitfalls I'm trying to think of right off the top of my head with CSS. No? Okay, I can't really think of anything. Just remember that your HTML is for your structure and your CSS is for making things visually appealing and readable, all that good stuff. And keep those two worlds kind of separate unless you have no choice. Like adding a style like this is usually bad. Like people don't like to see that unless there's like a really good reason to have to need that in the code, right? So you see, after I took that style away, now my paragraph is back to red. Yeah, I think that might be all I can really get into. Yeah, we're already 23 minutes into CSS, and we're going to go more into CSS in our last video. But for now, keep this in mind. Go practice. Go do some Googling. Go on W3 Schools. Look at all the CSS attributes and values and all that stuff that you can have, and just start playing around with them and how they interact with each other. All right. But until the next video, which is going to be on JavaScript, I hope you guys take care, and I will see you soon. Peace.